Hi, everyone. My name is Ana. I'm here just supporting Juan. He's one of the official organizers. This is a joint session that combines people from many different institutions, but unfortunately, people from the Smithsonian that were part of most, they were most of the people organizing this, weren't able to stay here because of the government shutdown that is currently happening in the US. So they are not able to be present here or either in remote. So yeah, we are just here supporting them. So we are able to have the session. We are gonna have 6 presentations, right? And the main theme is to talk about the different challenges and the different initiatives we are organizing for overcoming these challenges, how to move forward based on trust and collaboration. What else? All the talks are gonna be 10 minutes, and then at the end of the session, we are gonna have time for questions, right, from the audience. That will be all. Yep. Yeah, so we are almost on time for starting the first presentation. The first one is gonna be by Stephen Formel. Mapping the Future, Examining 25 Years of US Engagement in GBiF. Stephen?
We'll see. I have a loud voice anyways. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. Okay. Let me just test this. Oh, maybe not yet. Maybe this one? No. You know. I didn't expect the room to be so full. The first talk here is I have more nerves than I thought I would. But, you know, you guys were supposed to go somewhere else. No, but while we're working out, I want to say un gracias especial para Colombia. Su hospitalidad y su país me encanta. And for everyone else, maybe another thing I could say while sort of clarifying my position here, there we go, is that some of you may have known me as the GBiOS and OBIS USA node manager. I left that position this past spring, and now I'm working as a consultant primarily with OBIS. And so I want to be clear that I'm not here representing the United States, but rather just an enthusiastic member of the United States scientific community. And now, yes, perfect. Okay, so let me say one other thing too before we. Oh, yes, no, maybe. I messed it up. Sorry. Oh, there we go. Okay, yeah. So another thing is what we're presenting here today is it's a work of a lot of people. The GBiF North America community isn't just the United States; it also involves community members from Canada, and it's really a coalition of the willing, right? So this is not any one person, one institution group of slides, but rather something that enthusiastic scientists are coming together to express and to think about. One other thought is when Maria Cecilia's keynote this morning was really well said, and she noted the disparity between the global north and the global south. And so another thing I want to emphasize is we're here because we want to share the challenges in our own country and discuss them and get feedback on them. But I don't want this to be interpreted as that we have it worse than anybody else in the world, because that's certainly not the case. Okay, so now with all those caveats, all those disclaimers, now I begin. The United States, like a lot of places, our scientific enterprise is deteriorating. Infrastructure, that was maybe stood up 20, 30 years ago isn't functioning as well as it used to. We're working on a lot of volunteer labor as grants have, finished up and people continue to do the work unpaid and things like this. And a lot of our efforts are being sort of patched together with, temporary funding. And so as we are approaching the 25th anniversary of GBiF existing, we're thinking about how can we have another successful 25 years, right? The last 25 years, we've done an awful lot. Let's have another 25 that are really good. So collectively, we've been discussing this for quite some time as we think about how to find funding. It's something we feel intuitively, but maybe don't have the evidence to back up. And so that's what this is about, is trying to think about the last 25 years and analyze it, scientifically to be able to understand why we've been successful, where have we lacked, where have we been challenged or fallen down, and what can we do better in the next 25 years. So to do this, essentially our end game here is a paper that we're hoping to have either published or almost published next year in Oslo, in Norway. But in the meantime, I'll give you a sort of a roadmap of where we're going. We are working with theory of change as a way to try to understand and map out where we've come from and also where we're going. And so at number 2 there, we've already done some engagement with the community where we've solicited feedback to try to understand the different parts of the GBIF US community. And then also trying to start to, where we can put numbers on things and quantify things so that they can be thought about carefully. And then finally, like I said, our end goal here is to produce a paper that describes and shares this information and analysis. So where we are right now is around the blue triangle. We spent the last year or so trying to develop our ideas. We ran a Padlet, which is essentially an interactive workspace where people can share and comment on thoughts structured with that theory of change approach. And then we'll continue to solicit more feedback and then do analysis over the next year, present that in Oslo, and subsequently publish a paper. So the starting point for us, and it makes sense, if anybody was at any of the GBIF meetings earlier this week, you've already sort of heard about this stuff. But to go back to the original OECD report that GBIF came out of, because it laid out these work plan elements as a way of thinking about like a schema for developing a robust biodiversity data community. And importantly, that wasn't meant to live in sort of silos, right? This was a network and an ecosystem of data providers, data managers, et cetera. And so JJ Dearborn, who really did a lot of the hard work, JJ used to be the node manager for Biodiversity Heritage Library in the US, put together this slide, which is really impressive. Anybody here, I think, can appreciate how hard it is to hunt down all those logos. It takes a lot of time. But less tongue in cheek, I think a lot of you will recognize these names and these brands as, big players in the international biodiversity community. And they might have had, higher profile roles at different points, but many of these organizations have freely given to this, what we're calling the GBIF US community. And it's not always recognized. And the people who do that work, sometimes they're doing it on the side of their desk, right? They're donating whatever spare time they can find. To put some numbers on it, JJ pulled these statistics from GBIF. I'm not sure what date these were pulled from, but I think an easy way to think about this is, oh, wow, already. An easy way to think about this is that GBIF US makes up about 36% of the records in GBIF. And somebody here is going to say, but most of that's eBird, and that's true. There is a lot of eBird data in there, but it is geographically located in the US. So to use theory of change, again, this is a roadmap, right? You could use theory of change to say, how are we going to do our family vacation, right? How am I going to plan out my new lab that I just stood up? Here we're using it to be able to have a structured way of thinking about where we've come from and where we're going. I mentioned already this tool Padlet that we use to get feedback from targeted members of our community, mostly based around the GBIF North America steering group, and just try to start to understand what sorts of activities have corresponded to those OECD elements that we pointed out. So here are some quotes, just some quotes that we've cherry picked from that feedback. And starting with one, the first element, interoperability, standards, and linking. And there was a really big focus on Darwin Core and Tadwig as an incredibly impactful piece of our ecosystem, but also noting that it's almost 100%. Like Dave, is it 100% volunteer? 100% volunteer. So, it's something we all depend on so much, but it really depends on the goodwill of us as a community. And that's not maybe the most sustainable solution. Uh-oh. No. Yes, okay. The second element of the OECD report was an electronic catalog of names. There was actually earlier at the GBIF governing board this week, some really impressive work from Catalog of Life about where they're going and the ways that they're, headed towards getting closer to this goal. But the reality is we still don't have that complete global list of names. Maybe we never will, but it's important to acknowledge that, we're not there yet. Sorry, there we go. Number 3, the digitization of natural history collections. Within the United States, especially, we've had some really, really impressive collections be digitized through initiatives and networks like IDBio and VertNet. But we're also seeing closure of a lot of collections. So famously, for example, the Duke University Herbarium was closed down despite a heavy petition against that from the scientific community. These are related to things like funding, but again, we can't generate digital objects if there's no collection to be digitized. Species Bank from the OECD report, if anybody's gone back and read that recently, it's a little bit of an ambiguous idea. Where, to be honest, as we brought it up, we were sort of like, well, what exactly does this mean for a species bank? And so maybe this is something that doesn't deserve to go on in the next 25 years. And yet, despite that, those taxonomic silos are breaking down. So even if we're still not quite sure where we're headed, we do seem to be making progress towards understanding taxonomy. Digital biodiversity literature, BHL has worked wonders. Nicole, thank you. Gave a wonderful talk the other day at the GBiF governing board meeting about the way that BHL is changing and evolving in response to the dismantling of the science enterprise in the United States, especially. And then finally, training and outreach. Again, so many initiatives, both government and non-government agencies have contributed to the training of the US community. And yet it's still not enough. We're not seeing people coming out of their graduate degrees understanding how to do these things. So there's still a lot of volunteer effort contributing to that. And I do want to spend a moment on these 2 quotes because for us, we felt that it sort of summed it all up. So the first is that, highly skilled, highly connected people, that's who we are, a network of tremendous value worth further investment, right? The people in this room, that is one of the main assets we see from the last 25 years. But the big challenge is organizing and running things is being undervalued in most of that GBIF US community space. The activities are basically organizations with a single person running them, sometimes even part-time. And so if we don't keep this product going, the wheels are going to fall off. And so it's not looking, the future is not looking so rosy at the moment. Do I get extra time for the delay? Really quick, I'm not going to go through this. This is a theory of change diagram, just to give you a sense of how we're starting to structure that feedback into a map that we can continue to build and think about. Finally, this is definitely not being done in a bubble. All these people listed here are tackling specific facets to this. We are interested in hearing more feedback because, of course, we realize it's a massive community. And so, one more. Wait, it skipped? No, okay. First, I thank myself, I think. My mom. Okay, yes. First, Dave and I are here, but JJ really did most of this work. So I really want you to know that we're the ones sort of doing the cat herding on this project. And, oh no, did the slide? There's a slide here with a QR code. There it is. So if you'd like to give feedback on this idea, again, in that structured way, please go to this Padlet and you can contribute more, right? You can tell us where we're wrong. If everything I said today sounds like terrible and you're like, just stop. Go ahead and go there and do that. But if you have other, more positive and constructive contributions, we'd appreciate that too. Anyways, thank you so much for listening, and I'm sure I'll talk to more of you later. That's it.
Please, there are seats available for you still. Someone take my seat. I'm very happy to stand. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Kearney. I am the manager of the Biodiversity Heritage Library project in Australia, and I've also recently moved into the role of communications director for the global project. Thank you, Stephen, for that wonderful talk about GBIF. We're very closely involved with GBIF. We'd like to be more closely involved. He also mentioned that I gave this talk yesterday at the GBIF meeting. I only learned I was going to do that the day before, and they said I had 3 minutes. So you're getting the extended version. I'm really pleased to be able to give a more thorough introduction to what's going on globally with BHL. So I'm here today to talk about the future of the Biodiversity Heritage Library which at the moment is both uncertain and hopeful. Oops, back. Sorry. So the Biodiversity Heritage Library, for those of you who don't know, and I imagine most of you do because it's essential to the work of most of the people at this conference, it is the largest virtual library of biodiversity literature and archival material. And it is also one of the world's most critical resources of biodiversity knowledge. The Biodiversity Heritage Library is a global consortium of 667 libraries and publishers, institutions like natural history museums and herbaria across the world who have together made over 63 million pages freely accessible online. And this incredible resource, which represents the foundation of our understanding of biodiversity, is freely accessible to everyone. However, in March this year, the BHL faced an unprecedented challenge. The Smithsonian Institution, our administrative and technical home since 2006, when the project began globally, announced that it would have to cease to host the BHL on the 1st of January next year. This decision has placed one of the world's longest running and most widely used global biodiversity infrastructures at risk. And it also exposes the fragility of community-led infrastructures, even well-established ones like BHL, when they depend too heavily on a single institutional anchor. The loss of the Smithsonian has dire consequences for the BHL. For the past 19 years, they have provided the global BHL secretariat staff and the technical team, and Mike Lichtenberg is here and he's talking tomorrow. As they've also provided the 7 servers required to run the BHL website and the website itself. So the need to transition away from the Smithsonian and in such a short time frame required immediate action, careful planning and international collaboration. Fortunately for us, we were already planning to come together in April in Berlin for our annual global meeting. Now, these meetings are usually a time of joyous celebration and shared successes, but this year we were entirely focused on how to save the BHL and the BHL staff. In May, we formed a transition leadership team, appointing my colleague, Kelly Try from the University of Illinois in the role of transition director. And Kelly Try is here. We have a booth at the conference. Please come and speak to us. And together with the executive committee, and again represented here by Rich Wag, also here, come and speak to him, we have worked tirelessly over the last 6 months to create a foundation for a more autonomous, global and sustainable biodiversity heritage library. Oops, I'm a bit quick. Right, sorry. Our first step was to communicate this news to our partners and our users worldwide. And this blog post became the first of many, which have kept our global community informed and engaged about the BHL transition. In June, we launched a global call for support to invite new administrative, technical and financial hosts for the BHL. Oh, it's going far too fast, sorry. The call remained open throughout the mid of 2025 and it soft closed at the end of August. Alongside that call for support, we developed guiding principles for the BHL transition, reaffirming our commitments to open access, community governance, inclusive collections, the modernisation of our ageing infrastructure, and our alignment with FAIR principles. All right. The call for support resulted in some very promising offers, which we've been reviewing over the past month. And these have included offers of technical hosting, support for our existing systems, a very small amount of staff funding, and some really important and very welcome lump sums. The commitments that we have received so far provide stability for the BHL for 1 to 3 years, but this is not enough to secure BHL's future. To truly safeguard the BHL, we need long-term commitments. BHL must be, sorry, there's a slide. It must be supported by our global network and distributed across multiple institutions and regions. And if we are to modernise our infrastructure and enable deeper integration with BHL data, into biodiversity infrastructures, we need collective support and sustained investment from the biodiversity community. Central to BHL's transition is a new partnership with a fiscal sponsor. the Council on Library and Information Resources. This arrangement, which was finalised in August, provides BHL with a financial and legal home, and it also allows BHL to independently accept donations, pursue grants, and manage our own staff contracts. It also means that BHL is no longer constrained by a single US federal institution. We now have the flexibility to operate as a global, neutral, and community-governed consortium. Very excitingly, we've just launched our public fundraising campaign. This went live on Friday. There are now donate buttons on the BHL website. Please donate. From now on, we will increasingly rely on fundraising and donations from our users, and this is a way for our global community to directly support BHL's future. That global support has been growing for months. So since we first announced the loss of our institutional home, we have been inundated with outpourings of love and appreciation for the BHL. These have included statements like, the BHL is one of the most important, most valuable online projects and one of the greatest collections on the internet. It serves as an indispensable record of the Earth's biodiversity and represents an invaluable part of our scientific and cultural heritage. It's an absolutely vital resource for ecologists and evolutionary biologists. There's no other database on the web that provides digital access to species descriptions dating all the way back to the 1800s and beyond. And this is my absolute favorite from a BHL user. It's a pledge. I will send a box of homemade cookies every year for the rest of my life to whichever institution takes on the BHL. This is only a small sample of the feedback we've been receiving. It's kind of overwhelming and also very exciting to receive this. BHL is loved. We've also received emphatic messages of support from leaders of the biodiversity informatics community. So Donald Hoban, who's the former director of GBiF and also the inaugural director of the Atlas of Living Australia, described BHL as one of the top 3 biodiversity resources in the world alongside GBiF and iNaturalist. He said that BHL is the access point for most of the literature that gives context to all other biodiversity knowledge, and ensuring its preservation is of the greatest importance for biodiversity research and taxonomy. So BHL's future is still uncertain, but it is rapidly filling with opportunities and possibilities. The road ahead will not be simple, but we are laying the foundation for a more agile, distributed, and resilient BHL, one that can hopefully continue our mission of connecting the world to freely accessible, discoverable, and connected biodiversity knowledge. Although our call for support has soft closed, we are continuing to welcome new ideas and offers of collaboration. So if you or your organisations have resources or expertise or connections that could help sustain the BHL, we would love to talk to you. And if you'd like to discuss partnership, governance, or technical collaboration, or to learn more about the BHL transition, please come and see particularly Kelly or any of us here from BHL to learn more about our BHL transition. So please come and see us at the BHL booth during one of the breaks.
Our policies related to GBiOS and the impact of data sharing and
Is that good? Yes. Great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I want to talk to you today about a critical missing piece of infrastructure that we need to connect the ambition of the Global Biodiversity Framework, encoded in its 4 goals and 23 targets, with this fundamental policy instrument, which is the monitoring framework, which is critical to assessing the accountability of countries, making sure that we are measuring our progress towards these goals and targets. And it's fair to say that most countries are really struggling to implement a national monitoring framework, to figure out how to calculate the targets, how to mobilize the data, and to couple this observation process, the process of collecting data, to the challenges of assessing their progress and reporting that progress. And so what we have not done so far is assess what does a monitoring framework that is fit for purpose look like? How can we mobilize funding to support countries to improve their domestic monitoring frameworks, but do so in a way in which that funding is coordinated so that we can assess the trends in time. The critical problem is that we do not have sufficient statistical power and evidence to connect this piece here with the ambition on changing the trends in biodiversity and nature's contributions to people. Now, oh, this is going very fast. Underlying this policy science need, some time ago, a couple of years ago, we proposed that what is missing is the equivalent of the global climate observing infrastructure, the equivalent of GCOS, but for biodiversity. What we proposed is a global biodiversity observing system, which is built up from national biodiversity observation networks. Here you're seeing a picture of Colombia. A BON is composed of a network of sites where we're deploying a range of traditional and modern monitoring techniques, gathering data, and then those are combined into a knowledge service, something like a meteorological service, but a knowledge service for biodiversity. And this is a critical infrastructure. And of course, every country needs to do this, but most countries do not have that capacity. But moreover, if we're going to really realize the full ambition of the monitoring framework, what we need to do is invest in infrastructure and capacity to coordinate efforts. That is, to invest not only in the bonds, but to grow the global network, increase country participation, but also crucially to the statistical challenge, the data integration challenge, is fostering the coordination among countries. It's by doing that that we're going to be able to make the case, provide the evidence that the trends are changing, whether those trends are local, national, regional, or global. And our challenge is to do all of those things because we want to know if we're meeting our global goals and trends. Now, the news is not good right now. What you need is a critical piece of statistical information that you'll all remember from intro statistics class, which is the idea of power. This idea, the probability of detecting a trend when it's really there. And you'll remember from those classes that power is increased when we increase our monitoring effort. We get a stronger signal to noise ratio. We reduce measurement error, we increase measurement, and we get a stronger signal. At the scale of the planet, that involves increasing monitoring effort by equitable participation of countries in that observing network. Currently, based on analysis that I did with Brian Young a few years ago, where we used a Bayesian hierarchical model to estimate the statistical power to detect trends in the living planet database. Our analysis revealed that there was extremely low statistical power to detect a change in trends. So here, the color on the country represents the power that that country has to detect changes in the LPD population database using that model. So that's pretty grim. So how can we do better? What kind of technology do we need to explore different scenarios that will boost our global and national capacity to detect trends? This is where I think we need to invest some time and energy and resources. What I'm proposing is we establish a sandbox, a digital sandbox, to explore scenarios of investment in the monitoring framework, to make it fit for purpose. That requires some form of a digital twin of our planet that connects data coming in from our bonds to state-of-the-art models, whether process-based or statistical, to a simulacrum of our observing system. So we can guide investment, funding, and resources and human capacity to make better decisions to bending the curve of biodiversity. So what I've been doing is trying on my own, I need help, is to build this system. Thanks, Tanya. I knew I could count on you. And ask some critical questions that you're all asking yourselves right now. Does power increase with the number of countries? Does data sharing matter? We just heard awesome about DHL and GBiF, fundamental to the fabric of sharing. We need these networks. Do bonds offer a higher return on investment? Often an economist wants to know where your ROI is. If we can't demonstrate a significant ROI, no one's going to build GBiOS. This is not 1965. No one's going to give us money to build GCOS. So we have to be smart and savvy. So I'm going to collapse like 6 months of work into one slide. This digital thing, this digital twin, has 5 big steps. And you can modulate them how you want, depending on the sophistication of the analysis you want to do. This is a map, simulated map, of biodiversity change, trends, negative, 0, positive, for countries across the world. Here I've used a stochastic surface, a statistical model that gives me random mosaic of trends, but you could inform this with prior expectations from a model with real data. In this virtual world that we build, it is the true signal. Then our model samples the world like those bonds, like those monitoring programs, but with error. Then we assess the trends. You can do it with a t-test, or you can go to the full-blown machine learning and Bayesian hierarchical models. You will quantify the statistical power to detect trends. You can report those, and then you measure the return on investment. So we can add countries. We can imbue properties like GDP per capita, investment in monitoring. We can add realistic data. The world is our oyster. So what does the first result? Ooh, that's going. I'm sure I only pressed that once. So what is the first intuition affirming result? When we invest, when we increase the number of countries in our network and increase the number of effective sites in our national network, statistical power climbs the mountain. We get to this massive peak in power. And above 0.8, which is the kind of rule of thumb we're looking for, when we combine investments in national systems and in global coordination and engagement and participation by countries. That is the critical first result. Secondly, what about investment in power? That was the original map that Brian and I found with the Living Planet database. What happens now if we deploy 10 million per country in a smart way that reduces measurement error, increases the signal to detect the trends? Now we can increase power from down here to something that's more respectable and much better for policy-founded evidence and reporting. This is where we need to be. But you remember, the critical thing is it's not just more money for better statistical power. Who's going to fund that? What is the return on investment per $1 million invested? So the change in statistical power, the change in our capacity to mobilize evidence that we are meeting the goals and targets of the GBIF per $1 million invested. And that is what you get. That model will spit out which countries have the biggest ROI, are going to be able to more adequately detect those trends. And of course, this is just one realizing this is not reality. This is me playing games. But when you do this in a Monte Carlo fashion over and over and over again, then you get a statistical distribution of ROI. Canada, where I'm sitting, trying to convince the Ottawa government right now to invest in a monitoring network. Canada has no monitoring. It's never surveyed its biodiversity formally. So this is the kind of thing I want to take to Ottawa. Now, this is my last result slide. Remember we asked, is it possible to detect the changes by 2030 or by 2050, optimistically? Turns out the answer is yes. Only for extreme trends, so something like 1.5 to 2% per year, if we have a clear coordination strategy. If countries start getting together on how they synchronize sharing and synchronize analysis. When we get this global pooling, we can go from this baseline estimate of lousy power, less than 0.25, to this within 6 to 10 years, under an increase of investment by 1.5 to 2-fold. So that's a good news story. It is technically possible for certain types of changes to mobilize our current monitoring framework philosophy, our theory of change, if we are smart. So what I mean by smart is going back to the Global Environment Facility, or going to billionaire philanthropists, or going back to our governments and saying, hey, this isn't pie in the sky. We've just been a bit slow in mobilizing the knowledge to convince you that our monitoring framework can do the job. So I leave you with that note of optimism. But we need serious brains to do this. I'm co-chair of GeoBon. I'm sure there's an amazing network of brilliant minds who can come together to form a working group to develop this digital twin for GBiOS. That's what I would like to do in the next 6 months. I want to also make the case that we can target limited funding, and we know that the world is seeing funding dry up. But if we're smart about how we invest in national networks, and heaven knows about 160 countries have expressed concern that they cannot mobilize resources and capacity to measure the targets and measure the indicators for those targets. So let's figure out how we can work together, broaden participation, and lower the barriers for countries to participate in this global biodiversity observing system. Thank you very much.
Sandra, Emry. Diversity knowledge through collaboration. Also, a reminder, we are going to have time for questions at the end of the session.
Do I have to do something to get that up? Or? Awesome. Okay, thank you. I really liked the end slide of our last presentation by Andrea Gonzalez because it talked about how collaboration is really important, this coordinated effort across countries to make a difference. And so while I'm going to talk about something slightly different, I'm going to continue through that framework of why collaboration is really important to building this biodiversity knowledge. So I'm Sandra Emry. I'm a postdoc at University of British Columbia, and I also work with the Living Data Project, which is an initiative of the Canadian Institute of Ecology and Evolution, Canada's Synthesis Centre, to work towards rescuing historical data sets in Canada. So everybody here knows that biodiversity trends are complex to analyze. So I'm just showing 10 commonly used data sets here, analyzed in 3 slightly different ways. And all I want you to see here is that sometimes we see increases, sometimes we see decreases, and sometimes that's stable. And so why does this matter? Well, we have seen a huge increase in technological advances, drone imagery, satellite imagery, acoustic and image recognition, underwater acoustics, eDNA, all of these things have increased our ability to collect contemporary environmental data, but this isn't enough. We really need to be looking to the past to get a full understanding of biodiversity. And in this framework, collaboration is really central. And so when I say collaboration, I mean cross-institutional, so not just in academia, but also working with government organizations, with NGOs, with consulting firms, if we can manage it, across disciplines. So not just ecologists, but working with toxicologists, statisticians, GI specialists, taxonomists, and so on. And then cross-functional, because nobody here is great at everything. We're not an expert on many things, typically just 1 or 2 things. And so we need people that know coding and taxonomy, geospatial analysis, natural history, or even the lost art of reading cursive writing. And so the challenge here is that this legacy data set is often analog. It's stored in paper maps, reports, field notes. It's scattered across formats, institutions, and time. And so that makes this data really unused and hard to access in research and in policy. And so the Living Data Project, we work towards making this data more accessible for researchers and policy makers. So our first step in this framework is to identify and secure these data sets, and that requires both technical and interpersonal skills. So we work with archivists and librarians to help uncover these data sets, and researchers can help build trust with the data holders by emphasizing the shared benefits to making this data open, credit for their stewardship, visibility, and the broader scientific and policy impact that their data can make. Step 2 is to work towards digitizing and standardizing this data into interoperable formats. And so this relies pretty heavily on trainees that have strong data management and coding skills, who know how to navigate through often inconsistent and incomplete records, where the data partners are available, because we work with a lot of emeritus faculty, or unfortunately sometimes data holders that have passed away. And so that's not always available to us, but when we can, we really love to involve the data holders, because they hold that knowledge that's really critical to the methodology of the data collection. And then the librarians, again, here provide guidance on on standards, licensing, and adherence to open science principles. And then step 3, of course, a lot more goes into all of these steps, but step 3 is to analyze these biodiversity trends through collaboration among different experts, so ecologists, statisticians, GI specialists, and other types of experts. And here in the step, effective facilitation and structured workflows are really essential here to guide these interdisciplinary groups towards synthesis. And then finally, step 4 is to deliver the outputs for science and society through publications, tools, and outreach, things that extend the reach and the relevance of these results. And so for the remainder of the presentation, in the last 5 minutes or so, I'm going to illustrate this workflow through 2 case studies. So the first is historical pesticide spraying in New Brunswick. So forestry pesticide application is historically managed at the provincial level. So files are scattered across provinces. While some of these have been digitized, many remain only in hard copy. So government researchers recognize the value of these data sets for biodiversity in Canada, but they lacked the capacity to rescue them. And so the first step here then is we worked with the New Brunswick's Natural Resources Department. They had archived images of wall maps, such as this one, that represent pesticide treatment for a spruce budworm outbreak from 1952 to 1993. And so with the help from graduate students, mentored by postdoctoral researchers such as myself and other faculty members, individual treatment polygons like this were outlined for all of the 40 or so years so that they could be used in modern geographic information systems. During the compilation of this data, relevant information was for the plant treatments were assigned to polygons, and this was pulled from not only the maps themselves, but annual reports, and sometimes even individual pilot records had to be assessed to review or to ensure accuracy of the data. And so in total, we rescued nearly 5,000 records that make up over 45 million hectares of pest management activities over these 40 years. These were all digitized and documented. And so then step 3 is we convened a working group of ecologists, toxicologists, statisticians, and GI specialists from across Canada. We met in the location where all this pesticide treatment had occurred in New Brunswick. If you read the book Silent Spring, it's also talked about in that book. And so together we combined this data set of 4 decades of insecticide application data with contemporary benthic macroinvertebrate data that comes from CABIN, which is called the Canadian Aquatic Biomonitoring Network, which assesses the health of freshwater ecosystems in Canada. Since this presentation is more about the workflow, I'm not actually going to go into the results of this paper, but if you're interested, and I'm very happy to talk about it afterwards. And so some outputs from all of this work were 2 publications, including a data paper in ecology, presentations at national conferences, and our graduate student helped make a really lovely story map. This is the same QR code that was on the first case study slide, but if you're interested in learning more about this project, you can see it there. And then briefly, the second case study I'm going to talk about is the Living Planet Index's biodiversity index. So the Living Planet Index you may know about, but it's managed, the database is managed by the Zoological Society of London and World Wildlife Fund. The data aggregates nearly 40,000 vertebrate time series worldwide, including over 8,000 from Canada. The data is sourced from peer-reviewed literature, government reports, and community science programs. But these records often lack georeferencing, and there's concerns about potential biases in the data. So we worked with WWF and ZSL to georeference some of the Canadian time series and harmonize variables like location, taxonomic resolution, and monitoring methods. And the resulting database provided the foundation for 2 subsequent international working groups on LPI data sensitivity and representativeness. So we met virtually in 2021, as I'm sure you can imagine why, and then we met in Toronto last year as well. And so some of the outputs from this work are 2 publications and facets. One of them is just finishing up in review. but we've got a preprint up as well. There's an R package in the works for georeferencing biodiversity data. And we are developing a toolkit for applying these sensitivity analyses to national indices for conservation practitioners to understand the different methodological decisions that go into collapsing thousands of population time series into a single number, essentially. And so these outputs ensure that biodiversity indicators remain both scientifically rigorous and policy relevant, and they support our international reporting obligations. And so just in conclusion, why does this work so well for us? Well, we highly value diversity of many kinds, skill sets, discipline, backgrounds. We use a similar infrastructure and workflow, which I've talked about a bit here. And we all share a pretty important commitment to open science, which I'm sure everybody does here. So by combining these legacy data sets and this interdisciplinary expertise in a highly collaborative framework, we can unlock this biodiversity data that would otherwise remain inaccessible. So here's just a few of the collaborators. There's so many more that obviously would not fit on this slide, but so this work is thanks to many, many other people. Thank you.
This presentation is okay. So apparently, you're gonna
Beauvillier.
with the presentation, strengthening biodiversity data infrastructure with ObservIA and IIL system model.
I don't want to do that. Might you want to wait a little bit? Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Beauvillier. I'm a data scientist at the St. Lawrence Global Observatory. I'm going to be talking today about the tools we're developing to standardize and disseminate biodiversity data. So I said St. Lawrence Global Observatory, in short, SLGO, is a nonprofit organization founded in 2005. It's a neutral and independent organization, and we're working with about 60 partners to provide access to quality open data on the St. Lawrence River ecosystems for the benefits of the communities. Since 2019, we're also part of SIUS, the Canadian Integrated Ocean Observing System, And we're responsible for the St. Lawrence region, but we're also partners with CEUS Pacific and CEUS Atlantic. So our work at SETGeo is not collecting data. We're working with partners who do, and we're working with them to standardize this data and publish the data into our catalogs and data repository. So several years ago, all the work we were doing with biodiversity data was done manually. So I'm talking about metadata creation, data transformation, and data validation. And with time, we started to automate those processes, like automated the metadata creation with time, and then we started to also automate the transformations and the validation. And since about 2 years ago, we also started to implement some AI into sub-processes of the work we do. So this is what I'll be talking about today. So here you see a snapshot of a tool that automates the metadata creation. So we call it the metadata entry tool. It's developed within the CEUS network. So this tool is used by partners or data integrators to basically automate the metadata creation. So people would use this tool to input parameters such as title, authors, abstract, date of data collection, and so on. And also select the entry point to our catalogs, which is which are EOVs, so essential ocean variables. So when you go on any of the CEUS partners catalog, first thing you see are the EOVs, which are defined by the Global Ocean Observing System. Talking about automation, you see here 2 snapshots, or very high-level snapshots of tools that we are developing internally at SETGeo. So the one on the left is called ETL Riki. It's meant to transform data, biodiversity data, and all other kinds of data also. So we get raw data from partners, and then we select a bunch of transformation that we put sequentially, a little bit like a recipe. And in the end, we have Darwin core files. So this allows us, first of all, to have a repetitive transformation stuff that, for example, a partner gives us a new dataset or an iteration of the dataset. We can run through the dataset through this tool and get the idea, the process data at the end. And also, we're able to make logs on data transformation. So we're able to share with the partner, for example, everything that was done on the file. On the right, it's a tool that it's called Great Validator, Grand Validateur in French. And again, it does all kinds of different stuff, but mainly validation. So for biodiversity, for example, well, we put a file in it. Will it be a local file, or we can scan through CCAN servers also? And we're checking for compliance to Darwin core standards. So we can check column content, column names, and so on. And at the end, we have a visual representation of what we need to improve for the given data set before publishing to portals like OBIS and GBiF and so on. So I was also talking about AI earlier in the presentation. One tool we're developing is a tool to extract EOVs, so again, essential ocean variables and metadata directly from PDF files. So to give a little bit of context, we're working with a lot of partners that are along the St. Lawrence River that do collect data and produce lengthy PDF reports, scientific reports. And for us to read all that would take a lot of time. So we decided to build a tool where an interface where, for example, the data integrators put the file in it. And then we build a prompt. So the prompt is very lengthy. So if we want to extract all the EOVs, for example, but we give the model definitions of all the EOVs. So I'm talking about several thousand words there. We feed that to a large language model. And at the end, what we get is what we call the structured output. So basically a JSON file where you would see things like title, which is a string, and then an abstract is a string, EOVs, it's a list of strings, and so on. And this allows us to really speed up our processes and have this file at the end directly put into our database directly for publication. So we're building this, building the small blocks to get there, but we see a lot of efficiency potential improvement with that. So you see, we have a lot of tools that are here and there within our organizations. We want to be able to bring them together in a centralized tool. And so the data integrators or partners would use that, would use this tool to do all the data management aspect of it. So the strategy we have on that is really to focus on data management. So work on that, and whatever that is that data management, like password control, for example, delegate it to third parties. It's meant to be modular. So each and every time a new tool, a new automation of the process, the data ingestion process gets developed, we want to be able to put this tool in. It's also designed for collaboration. So right now we're the only ones working on it, but whoever joins us in the future would be able to collaborate. And also one thing that's important for us is that the user has the hands on the wheel. So whenever, for example, an AI makes a recommendation, we want the user to be able to either approve, modify, or reject those recommendations. Product roadmap for this. Well, right now we're building the foundations of it. Now we want to add the tools, the different tools, and add AI capabilities. So one thing we see going forward is to implement an AI agent in it, either to assist the users or make bits of work here and there. But the idea, like I was saying earlier, to orchestrate the work really from the beginning to the end, and to be able to publish datasets directly to our catalog. So this is the idea of the tool for now. So the user would put the file there at top left, and then decides what he wants to do on the file. So would it be pre-analysis, transformation, validation, and so on. And then content would appear on the right rectangle there, number 3. And yeah, that's it. So this is being developed. So to conclude today, well, this workload to automate everything, be able to add AI, it really helps us to we aim to increase the efficiency. We aim to increase the efficiency of our work, but also increase the quality of the data, the metadata that we treat, to strengthen the FAIR principles, and empower researchers, decision makers with quality data and metadata. And in the end goal is we hope for data or a better management of biodiversity data. So that's the last slide. The QR code there. So if you want to get to know SLGO more, I invite you to scan this QR code. And like I was saying, we work with also with different partners, a lot of partners, and we're part of the CU's network also. So that's it. Thanks for listening to me today.
We are gonna try to have recorded. We have some. Minutos, yo creo. 5 minutos. We move forward to the questions and discussion. So sorry, apologize. I really don't understand what it's okay, so also we have some questions from the remote world, from the ether. So maybe we can have those questions here. So there's a question for Nicole Kearney. Oh, sorry. how many permanent staff are currently ensuring the continuing running of the BHL, and how likely it is that this vital staff will continue with BHL after the transition away from the Smithsonian? Will the rich historic organizational knowledge be lost as a result of this transition?
So that question was from Siobhan Leachman, who is a BHL super user. Hello, Siobhan, very good personal friend of mine. Siobhan talked at the end of her question about the incredible institutional knowledge of the biodiversity heritage staff. We're incredibly lucky to have them. She also used the word permanent. There is no permanent anything at the moment with the BHL. The long-term staff for BHL include Mike Lichtenberg, who's here, and also Bianca Crowley, who've both worked for the BHL for almost the 2 decades that we've been running. So Bianca and Colleen Funkhauser are the permanent secretariat staff. By permanent, again, they're losing their jobs at the end of the year. We're doing everything we can to secure those positions and move them across to our fiscal sponsor, which is clear. We're doing the same for the technical staff. I'm working we're all working as hard as we can to try and bring in as much money and support for those people who probably can't continue in the way that we are without them. There are several levels of continuation for the BHL. So we could keep the lights on, which means the BHL website stays as it is. We don't add any more content. We don't have the sort of incredible collaboration that we have now. We don't want that. We want to be able to continue with the staff that we have. We want to be able to improve our infrastructure. We'd like to be able to, our website is aging. We'd like to be able to improve it. We'd love to be able to turn it into a mobile-friendly website. We'd like to be able to incorporate more and get more of our data out and connected to the other biodiversity infrastructures. To do that, we're going to need the incredible support of our partners across the biodiversity infrastructure. We'd love to be able to collaborate with you. We'd love to have grants that go in together. And we also are trying to fundraise. We've had some very lovely lump sums from some big organizations. We can't announce yet who those are. It's not enough to keep us going. So as I said in my talk, we have stability for 1 to 3 years. After that, it may be keep the lights on if we don't get more support from the community. This is a tragedy of the commons thing. You all use BHL every day in your work. We need everyone to come together and try and save what is the foundation of our understanding of biodiversity. Thank you. Kelly might be able to add more.
Finally, we are going to have the presentation by Krimmel.
Hello, my name is Erica Krimmel, and I am presenting virtually on behalf of my colleagues who you see here on the slide. We were hoping to be here in person talking to you, but due to the federal government shutdown in the United States, we're here virtually. So sorry to miss out on the in-person fun. I'm here to talk about planning for community-driven enhancement of information ecosystems, specifically to facilitate the discovery and use of paleontological specimen data. So for a little context, the world we're coming from is one where mobilizing data from fossil collections is challenging. These data provide an important deep time complement to extant biodiversity, but they're disproportionately less discoverable. And in this talk, my objective is to share a model for deep engagement with a specific domain and the broader biodiversity data community, while also thinking how we can integrate domain-specific requirements as we're thinking big picture about the development of sustainable global infrastructure. Paleontology is inherently an interdisciplinary field. It's at the intersection of geo and bioscience, has impactful research, and collections provide an essential resource of the field. Globally, the paleo collections community has invested heavily in the digitization of primary specimen data over the past decade, including over $10 million funded through competitive awards in the US alone. But fossil collections are distributed all over the world, and that geographic distribution makes it even more challenging to build and maintain the communities of practice that are really necessary to develop best practices and then support data mobilization. So enter the funded project that I'm presenting on. It's funded through the U.S. National Science Foundation, Geosciences Open Science Ecosystems Program. And these are our three objectives. So again, data from fossil collections provides an important deep time complement to extant biodiversity, but it's disproportionately less discoverable. For the past 2 years, we've been working on this project to explore why this is the case. And in this talk, I'm presenting some of our process and key outcomes. Process-wise, we use a community-based approach that centers the role of humans in open science cyber infrastructure. We gathered information and feedback from a diffuse network of stakeholders, from audiences, including everyone from researchers to developers. And we're discussing a specific process for our project here, but again, with the idea that something similar could be applied to domains other than paleo. So one of the challenges to bringing domain-specific expertise into conversations at the global and interdisciplinary level is that relationships between individuals, organizations, resources, those may not already exist. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. And then such relationships are really essential conduits for information sharing and for trust building. Over the past decade or so, the Paleo Data Working Group has built up a role for itself, facilitating relationships between resources, people, organizations that each support different aspects of the paleo data ecosystem. For example, this group helps the paleo collections community be aware of and make comments during Darwin Core public reviews. The group has been successful because it's been around consistently and has pretty low organizational overhead. But one aspect of this funded project was to continue to support and define the role of the Paleo Data Working Group. Another part of our process in this project was hosting workshops. We hosted 2 workshops for distinct curated groups of participants to focus on different sides of what we see as the problem. You know, we recognize that domain experts tend to be very busy people, and in-person workshops require undivided attention from participants in a way that's an effective method of developing understanding and feedback. So for the first of these workshops, we asked researchers and collections professionals in the paleo domain to think deeply about their functional needs. And then in the second, we asked professionals associated with cyber infrastructure resources to consider these functional needs and envision how individually developed systems might begin to integrate with each other. The DOIs on the slide go to a report for each of the workshops, and there's a lot of detail in there if you're interested. So we complemented that more social, people-centric activity with some pretty fundamental basic desk research to evaluate the existing information ecosystem. You know, in order to plan for the enhancement of the ecosystem, we really needed to gain a thorough understanding of what currently exists. How does it interact with other components? We have some of the categories that we were looking at on the slide, but like, you know, do we have authoritative information about lithostratigraphy, and how does it connect in between our other resources, for example? We're paying special attention to gaps in the shared global data infrastructure. Outcome-wise, the information and feedback gathered during the project is synthesized in some action-oriented deliverables that we hope will continue to facilitate the discovery and use of paleontological specimen data beyond the immediate project duration. First off, we took all that user feedback and we put it into 5 personas to help us communicate domain-specific user needs for the information ecosystem. This is based on, again, our work with the Paleo Data Working Group, those workshops, some additional stakeholder interviews. And for example, when we're talking to a resource like GBiF, you know, it can be really helpful to show them that paleo research aren't a monolith. So for example, we have 3 personas that are researchers, and they all have really different needs based on their goals and methods. Another outcome of the project is a symbiota portal for fossil specimen data management. We recognize that as a paleo collections community, we're making great progress in digitization and data mobilization. But at the same time, we're kind of unintentionally leaving colleagues behind when they lack capacity and or resources to jump on a moving train. So the Paleo Data Symbiota Portal is a critical tool to address this gap. It provides a specimen data management solution for collections that might not have strong in-house technical support or infrastructure, and it's supposed to be very low barrier to entry. Another outcome is what we're calling the Paleo Data Knowledge Hub. So this is open access, reusable resources for anyone producing, managing, or using paleo specimen data. It's a website with curated metadata and links out to external resources, as well as some original content by the paleo data working group. And then we have what we're calling the Paleo Roadmap, which is a way that we want to create a framework to build future projects and proposals from. And that framework includes recommendations. Those recommendations are specific, they're actionable, they're scalable. When we say actionable, we're really talking about actionable by our key collaborators. We want the requirements to represent the diverse audiences that we find working with paleo specimen data. So for example, we might focus on an enhancement area like we need a data broker for authoritative information about local stratigraphy. And that section might include a description, some talk about benefits and consequences, and then finally that list of recommendations. So the roadmap will initially be released as a static report deliverable for our current project, but also as a dynamic version that can be adapted by the community. And that's it. So thank you so much for listening. I am here, I assume, I hope, in Zoom if you have questions, and I'd be happy to chat more. Thank you.
I need to use, I always forget. So thank you everyone for sticking with us until now. So I guess we can move forward with questions to the speakers. Any comment about any of the presentations? I don't know. Is there any question also in the ether, in the internet? But we have a question here.
Yeah, I have a question for Andy Gonzalez. So super cool stuff, right? Okay, for people online. Okay, is this good? Okay, so you talked about return on investment, right, and calculating that, which I thought was really interesting, but the units on your return on investment were like, it was what per dollar, improvement per dollar, right? But improvement is sort of improvement in power, right? But I was wondering if they're using that same setup you have, if there's a way to add or potentially interest or capacity to add another layer that allows you to also say something about return on investment in terms of potential monetary, you know, if we say to put it into sort of ecosystem services, carbon benefits, biodiversity credit, dollars, is there some way we can do that to target groups that might not, you know, for example, in the US, the government certainly doesn't care about biodiversity at present, but if you can put a dollar sign on that, maybe we can actually make them care.
So GBiOS has developed these essential ecosystem service variables that are kind of a, what's the word, systematic approach to tracking change in various variables that are relevant for social and economic outcomes or nature's contributions to people. So those variables could be part of that. And if you had specific country applications of that, so think of mangrove, the value of mangroves, for example, right? There's a essential biodiversity variable right there, but it also has a ton of ESVs associated with it. So what is the return on investment in natural capital, or whatever you want to, whatever framing you want to use? Those layers are actually out there already. People like Becky Chapman-Kramer and others at Stanford have been producing those layers. So I think that's I have not done that. I think that's totally logical next step.
Hey, my question is for you, Simone, sitting in front of me. Really great talk. I think what you're developing is looking really promising. I'm curious about investing in CCAN, which has a bit of a reputation for being difficult to stand up and that sort of thing. Are you able to containerize your work so that other people can reuse it, or is that still sort of maybe something you think about for the future?
It's a good question. Well, CCAN, there are some efforts within the CU's network to push development on it. So, and all of that is made open source on the GitHub of CU's. So you can find stuff there. Regarding the tools that I talked about today, most of them are at the moment internal tools, but they're meant to be made open source at some point. But regarding the biodiversity validation aspect, myself and some other people that are at the conference this week have been working on a package called PioBase Tools, which is also on the GitHub network, GitHub of CU's, so that can be used and people can contribute also to it. So I hope it answers your question.
So apparently there are no more questions on the internet. And I don't know if any of you have any further questions here. Yes.
Thank you. James Macklin from Canada. So an observation, we have several entities here that are talking at a global level. We have others talking at regional levels. And we're talking about tools. We're talking about data and the process chains, the workflows. I think one thing we have to realize at the global level is that there are kabillions of these things being developed. There are so many of them. Some are open source, some are not. And we are massively duplicating a lot of them. And this is a problem. And those of us who play sort of in that global spectrum, we understand the real challenge of getting our governments, well, from regional to governments to mutual funding across governments, seriously challenging. And this limits our power because in duplicating, we're taking this very small amount of funds we have and not, I'll use Andy's word, power, not realizing the power of what we could have if we were able to collaborate better. And so many of us are trying hard, right? We're trying very hard to make this a global problem and then to leverage the expertise both from the informatics side and the science side. But this is a real challenge. We all have to lobby our governments. This is a big picture thing. We have to lobby our citizens to help us to do better at collaborating. So this is just a high level observation and comment. There's a lot of expertise out there to leverage.
I think this is a super important point. In some sense, the diversity of platforms creates a fragmentation as well and hinders flows of information. And from my simulations, by far the most significant variable is coordination and collaboration. So this conference is an example of the need of bringing together 4 global networks to find the bridges and how to do this working together. We've been developing Bot in a Box with GeoBot, another platform, open source, entirely freely available on GitHub, great containerized workflows and all the rest. Huge barrier there. But the European Space Agency comes to us and goes, can you connect to our EO pipelines? So you have the Copernicus satellite service providing EO data, that goes onto the stack, and then you can run it. So you're thinking, oh, there's one pipeline that's being connected. But if you could do that systematically, funding could come from agencies like that. It's not even a huge amount of money. It's like $50,000, right? But we're not thinking strategically about how to glue together the pieces. So that was, for me, the motivation for doing that work was exactly this.
I had a question for Sandra, but I don't remember where you're sitting. There you are. Okay. My question is, what you presented was awesome and cool. And it's like when I run into these situations where I'm interested in, recovering legacy data, it's a bit overwhelming. And so I'm curious, you may have said this, and apologies if I missed it. are you able to distill down your work into some sort of protocol or something that other people could use as a framework for like, I get approached by somebody, here's how we break it down to see if it's even feasible before we look for money?
Yeah, I have two comments on that. One, there was a paper written by some folks that work with the Living Data Project in 2023. The lead author was Ellen Bledsoe. And essentially it does what you're asking, which is developing a workflow on how to go from this incredibly messy data set that is in analog form to it being archived on a repository that follows the FAIR principles. So the short answer would be that paper is a great resource. And the longer answer is that, yes, sometimes it is really complicated. So the way that we currently run it, and it's simply due to our funding model, is that we, for the data rescue portion, we host internships and work with graduate students and sometimes undergraduates, depending on the complexity of the project. We narrow the scope, but oftentimes the first kind of like 200 hours or so of that internship really is developing a protocol to get that data from boxes in a basement in a government lab online. And so we're not even digitizing and doing QA/QC on the data yet. We're simply developing the protocol to get the data there, and then we follow up with it by following that protocol and getting it online. So yeah, sometimes depending on the data set, it is a really lengthy process and can be really overwhelming. So it helps to kind of narrow the scope into multiple tasks and think about like, okay, well, let's just figure out what is our relational database going to look like, and then we'll work on mapping it into that database. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
So pesticides, 1960s, big map. What was the impact on freshwater biodiversity?
Sure, yeah. So the punchline there is that contemporary land use had a much bigger impact on benthic macroinvertebrate communities. But there was a small effect of pesticides, but it was the effect was more to do with the duration. So how long pesticides had been applied to that stream versus the intensity. So that's kind of the punchline of it. Yeah, good question. Okay.
Sorry, Daphne Weber from the Global Mountain Biodiversity Assessment. You mentioned your funding scheme. Yes. What's your funding scheme?
Yeah, so Diane, our director, would be able to speak to this much better, but she is a professor and the director of a professor at UBC and the director of the CIEE up until I think in a year or so. And so she got an NSERC Create grant, which in Canada, so this is 6 years of funding to start this initiative. And so we use it towards hosting these data rescue internships, which funds graduate students. It's kind of like, think about it in place of a TA ship. They would take on one of these data rescue internships to work with postdocs like myself. My postdoc salary is also primarily paid from this NSERC Create grant, along with a couple other postdocs at McGill and University of Regina. And so we host 2 cohorts of these internships a year and pay the stipends out of this Create grant. And then similarly with the working group applications, we host 2 working groups a year and different data partners. Anybody in Canada that's working with biodiversity data can apply to host a working group. So these 2 were applied by WWF Canada and NRCan, Natural Resources Canada in New Brunswick. But that is actually quickly coming to a close. Our NSERC Create grant ends next spring. And so we are looking for new funding models to keep this going because I just think it's such a valuable project. I'm really interested to hear if anybody else is working in some other similar initiative that's working towards rescuing legacy data sets. There's just so much data out there sitting on people's hard drives or in boxes, and we speak about wasting resources. We're losing, many, many, many millions of dollars every year by, not having this data available. Yeah, I'm happy to talk more about funding if you have more questions.
Thank you. A question I think is probably directed mostly at Andy. I was going to just comment and say I totally agree with the coordination at this sort of higher level derived product stuff. A question for you, Andy. Well, it's two questions. One's a simple one, which is how does the work you're doing intersect with the work that's happening under EcoCode and the development of models and monitoring strategies actually there? And then my other question is on your work, which links into the historical work we've heard about today. How important, or can you differentiate in the benefit to power of historical data versus us observing new data in the contemporary?
EcoCode is a working group of recently formed, a couple of years ago now, of GeoBon, super group, working on this idea of BMIP, Biodiversity Monitoring Intercomparison Project, equivalent to what they have in climate space when you want to compare robust fashion scenarios and climate outcomes. We lack that again in biodiversity. Part of their approach is also about predictive models. We're often fitting statistical models, and we want to be guiding action through what we'll call leading indicators or indicators that take you into the future about what to do. So obviously my next step is to have dinner with them tonight. The second question is super important about baselines. Your power is only good as the variance you're estimating that's going in, the variability around your parameter estimate, and invariably we don't have some obvious exceptions that kind of prove the rule that we don't have good baseline data, although sometimes paleo data or discovering data is a good way of getting some of that. That is a critical parameter in that simulator. So the more we can pull out baseline information, the better.
Final question. We have time for a final question. No? Okay, so it's time, yeah. So thank you so much for attending this presentation, and I apologize on behalf of the team because we have some technical difficulties. So.